Good morrow, Ashers! Every single system in Ashes of Creation is deep and intricate and is designed to factor into every single design decision into the game. Mounts are no different. Mounts in Ashes of Creation will factor into your everyday gameplay and will shape the course of the very server and the world around you as you play. In a game where fast travel is extremely limited, a fast and able mount which you will have to collect or actually husband via a crafting kind of system, this is incredibly important. Additionally, some of the higher tier mounts, especially available to mayors of cities and nodes, will actually give you combat abilities to sway the battles for the various areas that you might want to control. With that intro out of the way, let's jump into the various types of mount that you will be able to get and the systems that they revolve around. There are three primary with a few subset of ways to actually obtain a mount in Ashes of Creation. The most important method, and probably the most enjoyable in my opinion, is that you'll be able to find wild mounts in the wild and actually tame them using a profession, almost like a crafting profession, called animal husbandry. This is an extremely exciting concept because by being a professional tamer, you could quite literally actually go and make a profit because the mounts will be trainable. These people will be considered one of the most important trading professions or crafting professions in the game, which is something that I've not seen in almost any other game. What's more is by using animal husbandry, you could actually breed varying types of mounts with different kind of subspecies. This is fascinating because it opens up the possibility of getting so many different kinds of looks and skins and mounts and stats, because each mount will have different stats as well, that you can actually combine to create something unique and new and cool, which is obviously something that is very, very important in MMO, customizability being a primary driving force in any MMO. Besides animal husbandry, mounts will also be a very rare drop from certain bosses and dungeons within the world. Most notably, the tier 3 or highest quality mount called a royal mount will give you temporary access to flying as a very, and I mean very, extremely rare drop from world bosses. These royal or extremely rare mounts could even be a drop as a dragon, which has the most potential in combat to use during sieges or attacks or trying to fight with in PvP even, but more in a controlled setting when you're sieging a node. This is very, very unique as the dragons will have a very limited lifespan. But to be able to cultivate that egg that you drop from a boss, you'll actually have to go and get animal husbandry and build them up. These eggs are also tradable, so you could potentially, once again, create an economy around that. I pick up an egg, I don't have animal husbandry, let me take it to my friend, pay him a few gold, he then raises it for me and sells it back to me at a profit. As for simpler mounts, the ground mounts will be awarded to you in starting areas by simply just completing some quests. So it's not like all mounts in the game require a heck of amount of work. It's just the higher tier mounts and the more versatile and cool ones, I guess, would be the ones that are difficult to get. Let's take a look at the different kinds of mounts that you'll be able to get. Starting at the highest possible tier, the royal mounts or tier 3 mounts. Within this category, we will find the true flying mounts. These are stuffs like griffins, dragons, and mounts that have a very much combat influence to them. They'll be able to survey the battle during a siege and actually cast abilities to assist in the battle. There's a very clear distinction between the normal flying mounts as well as the dragon mounts, which are obviously the more rare ones, dragons being the more powerful version. These mounts will only be available to mayors of towns or cities or higher tier nodes, but they will also be able to drop from very, very rare encounters as well, which would mean you always have temporary access to them. If as a mayor you actually gain this mount and you lose your mayorship, you also lose access to the mount. The same goes for the dragons. They have a limited lifespan. Intrepid is basically saying that only about 10 to 20 people on a server of 10,000 people will actually have access to these true flying mounts at any given time during game. I'm not sure I like this concept completely. These mounts are quite a bit larger than your normal tier 2 or tier 1 mounts, but what that kind of means to me is there's room for you to be able to keep these mounts in a more simpler form, maybe losing their size as well as their carrying capacity, but also losing their flying. So I would like to see a mount that you keep if you ever had a tier 3 royal mount before, but it essentially becomes a glorified glider and just a skin that you can use on any other mount, obviously to make it smaller and less impressive. But I don't want to lose a mount completely once my mayorship is over or I no longer am able to use the dragon mount that I have dropped. I just want to keep that prestige, even just in a tiny bit of form, to say that I've done the work, I've been there, I got this mount. That brings me to the tier 2 mounts, which are essentially glorified gliders or heavily upgraded tier 1 mounts, which might be more carrying capacity, more speed, more stats, or whatever the case may be. But they're more than these simple mounts that you find in the starting area. I would like the tier 3 mounts that I talked about earlier to downgrade to a tier 2 mount whenever you no longer have access to them. These include stuff like hippogriffs that become gliders. You can actually see one of them during the AMA streams where they're actually not able to fly because they're not mayors, but they kind of keep them. I hope to actually see a lot of variety within this tier, a lot of customizability. And this is the tier where I expect the most interesting things to happen during husbandry. Right now there isn't too much information or footage around this tier, but I assume this is where the most content will take place. The other tier of mounts, and this is considered the starters, are the tier 1 mounts or ground mounts. These can be obtained really early in the game from what I can actually tell based on the wiki as well as the sporadic information we've gotten. These include simple stuff like horses and all kinds of stuff that you might expect, lizards, and just check your screen for some examples with the footage that I put up. I also think this will be the starting point for animal husbandry, so if you're taming and breeding the mounts together, this is where they'll start out on, and the more you progress within your husbandry, you can get more and more tier 2s via the system using tier 1 mounts. So it's not like this is a useless tier, it's more just a starting point for you to start jumping into the world of mounts, which is probably going to be my first crafting profession, just for the hell of it. The final mount type that is not the last topic of this video is the mule mount. These, I assume, will actually fall into varying tiers of the system itself. And the idea behind them is a slower, less mobile mount, most likely, which will allow you to carry more actual gear. It is very, or drops in general, it is very clear that they will be able to carry less than a caravan would, which I've spoken about in a different video. But at the end of the day, this will still allow you to transport more goods more safely and a little bit faster than you normally would be able to on foot. All of this still ties into the husbandry system, so you'll be able to increase the carrying capacity as a result. As promised, the last topic of this video is that you'll be able to craft armor for your mounts. Armor, gear, satchels, all kinds of things are to be expected to apply to your mount, which will augment their actual stats. I assume that the system will be really intricate, because once you start looking into it, I can apply armor, but does that affect its carrying capacity? I can apply heavy armor, but that'll affect its speed, etc, etc, etc. So in the event that you end up going for a more combat focused mount, you will have to give up stats in other places or effects in other places to get that kind of battle prowess. Once again, how the actual mount combat could work is very much unclear right now, because I don't expect PvP in the open world in a more 1v1 or less formal setting than Sieges to be very mount centric, but it does seem that they want to actually make it able to at least have a little bit of an influence, which is interesting but also very hard to guess at. In summary, it is a very, very hard system to make work well. In comparison to other games, Guild Wars 2, for example, does mount really well. They're not a highly customizable system, but each and every one of the, I think there's 8 mounts that you have their different uses, but you kind of only do that. They don't tie deeply into the game. They're almost purely a way to move around. Sure, some are more vertical, some are more speed orientated, and some are more utility orientated, but the mounts have very specific uses and only really are customizable in the way they look. Whereas other games like WoW does it more as a collectible. Yes, there are definitely mobility elements, but WoW definitely more focuses on the fact that as a prestige item, the mount is only there to make you look really fancy and to prove that you've spent many hours in the game. Ashes seems to be in the middle of these two. There is an extreme amount of utility, but at the same time, the prestige behind them is really, really important. And with Steven's philosophy of making you work for things you want in a game, mounts could be probably the most exciting system in the game that isn't actually related to combat, except for the little bit of mount combat that we know little about. Needless to say, this is an aspect that I'm very, very excited about, and I hope everyone had fun talking about or listening to this video. If you have any comments as to what you think might be possible with some of these mounts and how it would actually play out, please let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want to see more of these videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.